June 5th, 1944. In a quiet London flat, a man sat alone beneath the dim glow of a desk lamp. A single sheet of coded paper lay before him. Words that, within hours, would reach Adolf Hitler's desk. Outside, thunder rolled through the clouds, but it wasn't thunder at all. It was the distant growl of aircraft engines, thousands of them, ready to cross the English Channel. Operation Overlord, D-Day, was about to begin. And if this man succeeded, the greatest deception in modern warfare would unfold exactly as planned. His name was Juan Pujol García, a failed chicken farmer from Barcelona with no intelligence background, and yet tonight he was about to decide the fate of Europe. For years, he had been feeding the Nazis an intricate web of lies, building an army that didn't exist, reporting movements that never happened, and crafting a network of 27 imaginary agents that even German generals swore were real. Now, as Allied soldiers prepared to storm Normandy's beaches, the entire success of the invasion depended on one thing: that Hitler continued believing every word Juan Pujol sent. But how did a quiet, stubborn Spaniard with no connection to Britain become the man who outwitted the Third Reich? To understand that, we have to go back to a nation divided by its own war, and a man who hated war more than anything. Spain, 1936. Civil War ripped the country apart. Juan's farm was seized, his family threatened, and he was forced to fight for a cause he despised. When World War II erupted, he swore never again to serve tyranny. He went to the British embassy in Madrid and offered to spy on the Nazis. They laughed him off. So he went to the German embassy instead. Pretending to be a devoted Nazi sympathizer, he claimed access to British secrets. The Germans, desperate for eyes inside England, handed him a codebook, invisible ink, and £3,000 in cash. His mission: move to London and report on the British war effort. Instead, he moved to Lisbon, Portugal, opened a tourist guidebook, and began inventing everything. From a cheap hotel room, Pujol began sending reports as if he were living in London. He described soldiers marching through fog, ships leaving port, and even the sound of air raid sirens. To sound genuine, he added small personal details: when he felt sick, what cafes he liked, how the weather dampened morale. To make his fiction believable, he created a network of imaginary agents: a Swiss-German businessman in Liverpool, a Venezuelan student in Glasgow, a Portuguese dock worker in Wales, a British pilot smuggling letters abroad. Each had a story, a personality, even family drama. The Germans loved it. The deception grew so convincing that Berlin began sending him $500 a month to pay his agents, the equivalent of $11,000 today. They thought they were funding one of their top networks in Britain. In reality, they were bankrolling a single man and his typewriter. But when one of his letters was intercepted, British intelligence panicked. It described a convoy leaving Liverpool, something that had actually happened. MI5 launched a manhunt for a spy ring that didn't exist. Then they noticed a slip. The letter mentioned Scots trading a liter of wine. Britain used pints and quarts, not liters. The imposter wasn't German. He was mocking them. MI5 realized the truth. Whoever this was, he wasn't their enemy. He was their greatest weapon. In 1942, MI5 tracked him down. When they met him in Lisbon, they were stunned. This quiet Spaniard had single-handedly deceived the German High Command. They brought him to London, gave him British citizenship and a new code name, Agent Garbo, after the actress Greta Garbo, master of disguise. With MI5 handler Thomas Harris, Garbo refined his art. He now had access to real military facts, which he used as scaffolding for his lies. His letters were masterpieces, long, detailed, believable. To the Germans, he was a genius. To the British, a miracle. By late 1942, the war had reached a critical turning point. Nazi forces controlled most of Western Europe, and in North Africa, General Rommel's Afrika Korps was pushing the British to the brink. The Allies were preparing a massive counterattack, a top-secret invasion of the North African coast codenamed Operation Torch. If successful, it would give them a foothold to strike back at Hitler's southern flank. But secrecy was everything. If the Germans discovered where the invasion would land, it could end in disaster. Inside his London flat, Agent Garbo prepared to stage his first real test as a double agent. His mission wasn't to leak information, but to distract. MI5 instructed him to divert the Germans' attention away from North Africa. So with his handler, Thomas Harris, Garbo began crafting the perfect illusion. In his reports to Berlin, he described suspicious movements in Scotland, Norwegian language training among British troops, and Canadian soldiers conducting mountaineering drills. One of his fake agents even reported rumors of Russian forces moving westward to assist the British. Garbo never once said the word Norway, but the message was clear. Hitler's intelligence officers began to believe an Allied invasion of Norway was imminent. The Führer, already obsessed with protecting his northern flank, diverted hundreds of thousands of troops to defend the Norwegian coast exactly as Garbo intended. But Garbo wasn't done. As Operation Torch approached, he decided to go further, to build absolute trust. On November 1st, 1942, just 1 week before the real invasion, he wrote a letter to his German handlers. In it, he included every detail of the upcoming operation, the locations, the commanders, the timing, everything, perfectly accurate. Then he did something extraordinary. He deliberately mailed it late. The letter reached the Germans on November 9th, 1 day after the invasion began. By then, Allied troops had already stormed the beaches of North Africa. The Germans, reading the letter in disbelief, realized Garbo's report had been flawless, only late. They sent back a response filled with admiration. "We are sorry it arrived too late, but your last report was magnificent." The deception had worked flawlessly. Garbo had proven his loyalty beyond doubt, at least in German eyes. They began sending him more money, more codes, and more trust. To Berlin, he was a hero. To London, he was now their most valuable weapon. Throughout 1943, Garbo's legend grew. His imaginary network expanded to 27 agents, each with an alibi and backstory. The Germans were so impressed, they began paying him enormous sums to fund his network, over $100,000 a month in today's money, and MI5 quietly pocketed. They believed in his every word so deeply that they stopped recruiting new spies in Britain. Why risk more when they already had the best? He even staged drama within his fake network. One agent died of pneumonia, another married a nurse. Berlin mourned their fallen hero and sent condolences to a widow who didn't exist. By the end of 1943, Garbo had become the most trusted spy in the German Empire, and the Allies were preparing for their greatest gamble yet, D-Day. The Allied command, led by General Eisenhower, decided to make them believe the attack would fall not on Normandy, but 150 miles away at Calais, the narrowest point across the English Channel. The plan was called Operation Fortitude, and at its heart stood Agent Garbo, the man who had already convinced Hitler to move armies on a whim. To ensure they stayed convinced, Garbo and MI5 launched Operation Fortitude. Using encrypted Morse code, Garbo's messages painted a vivid picture. American divisions massing in the southeast, assault barges near Dover, King George visiting troops preparing to cross to Calais. At the same time, Britain turned the illusion into reality. Inflatable tanks, wooden planes, fake airfields, and entire armies built from canvas and plywood. German recon pilots saw it all and confirmed Garbo's stories. Hitler's analysts moved pins on their maps. The invasion, they concluded, would strike Calais. Normandy, they said, was merely bait. June 5th, 1944. The air over southern England vibrated with the hum of engines. Nearly 7,000 ships and more than 11,000 aircraft stood ready. 2 million Allied soldiers waited. In his flat, Garbo prepared one final message. He urged German operators to keep their radios on past midnight. At 3 a.m., his signal went out. Troops boarding. Vomit bags issued. Rations distributed. The invasion was imminent, but the German operators had gone to sleep. When they finally decoded the message, it was too late. The sea was already red with fire and blood. At dawn on June 6th, the Allies stormed the beaches of Normandy. The first Allied waves crashed onto the beaches of Omaha, Utah, Juno, Sword, and Gold. The German High Command hesitated. Garbo's earlier reports insisted this was only a feint. The real strike would come at Calais. Hitler agreed and refused to move his reinforcements. Even as thousands died on the beaches, he kept his best divisions idle. For weeks after D-Day, Hitler waited for the main attack. Garbo continued feeding him fake updates about Patton's 1st U.S. Army Group preparing in England. The Germans even built defenses to repel a force that didn't exist. By the time they realized the truth, the Allies had already landed 500,000 men in France. The deception had worked perfectly. Hitler's obsession with Calais bought the Allies the time they needed to secure Europe's liberation. For nearly 7 weeks, Hitler's armies remained frozen in the wrong place, waiting for a ghost invasion. When the truth finally dawned, it was far too late. The Allies had already broken through Normandy's defenses and were racing toward Paris. The deception had worked perfectly. A single man's web of lies had reshaped the course of the war. When Paris was freed in August 1944, the world celebrated generals and armies. But deep in MI5's files, one man's name stood apart. Garbo's lies had changed history. His deception shortened the war and saved countless lives. Both sides decorated him, Hitler with the Iron Cross, Britain with the Order of the British Empire. No one else in history has received medals from two opposing nations in the same war. Juan Pujol García, a man who had never fired a shot in combat, now held medals from both sides of the same war. But victory brought danger. Garbo knew that if the Nazis discovered the truth, they would hunt him to the ends of the earth. So, after the war, with MI5's help, he quietly vanished. Officially, Juan Pujol García died of malaria in Angola in 1949. Newspapers printed the story, and the world moved on. But in reality, the master of deception had pulled off one final trick. He was alive, living under a new name in Venezuela, where he ran a small business and raised a family. The man who had once played nations against each other was now content to live in peace, surrounded by the quiet he had always longed for. Decades later, a historian named Nigel West began searching for him. After calling hundreds of Garcias in Spain, he reached a nephew who whispered, "You want my uncle." Garbo was alive in Venezuela. When they met, West found a gentle, aging man who still spoke with the same calm precision that once fooled Hitler. In 1984, Garbo returned to Europe for the first time in 40 years. Standing on the beaches of Normandy, he finally saw what his lies had protected. Tears rolled down his face. His war had been fought not with bullets, but with words, and words had saved a continent. Juan Pujol García died in 1988, quietly, far from the world stage. Yet his story endures as a lesson in the power of intellect over violence. His deception became a model for modern psychological warfare, a reminder that information can be stronger than any weapon. He never sought wealth or recognition. He simply believed that one person driven by conscience could stand against evil. And he proved it. Today, no statues bear his likeness on the shores of Normandy, but his presence lingers in every gust of salt wind. Because sometimes, history's greatest heroes are not the ones who fire the bullets, but the ones who write the words that stop them.